Awesome. And so, again, thanks everybody for coming. We are really excited to have Lauren from the Environmental Defense Fund, who's a climate justice solutions manager, kind of overview of the current environmental justice landscape and talk about, where do we go from here in a needed time. Um, I'm really happy to have Lauren here, who is an esteemed EJ colleague, a voice in our community on a national level. And she was also at the Greater Baltimore Climate Summit, and she overviewed at the summit, where are we in the environmental justice movement? And so now is a great time to kind of continue that discussion and expand on everything that she overviewed in that breakout. If you were at the climate summit, you know how amazing of a time we had. If you weren't there, stay tuned for what we have to come, and thank you so much for being here today. You can go to the next slide, Lauren. And so I just wanted to highlight some of our partners for last year. Environmental Defense Fund was one of our early supporters, thanks to Lauren and Margot. And so we really want to just shout out partners. Without them, we wouldn't have had an amazing first summit. And we're really excited to see what's next. I'll hand the floor over to you, Lauren. And so, Lauren, before I give her the mic, I want to just say that I met Lauren because she was speaking at the National Environmental Justice Conference in DC. I can't even remember how many years ago now, but sometimes, later on in the day, you're just kind of heads down, trying to soak up as much information as you can, but you really just kind of need a break. And when Lauren came on, when I say I turned my head around, and I was like, who is that speaking? I mean, there was such passion and conviction in her voice, and she knew what she was talking about. She knew the science, she knew how to organize, and she knew the current landscape at the time. And so I've just kind of been following Lauren. She's an incredible speaker, she's an incredible expert. And I remember when she was just graduating from her grad program at GW, getting her master's of public health, and now she's a manager at Environmental Defense Fund in less than 5 years. And she's kind of just leading this national landscape, uh, using tech to make sure that people have access to analytics and can expand their community development efforts. So I'm honored to introduce Lauren Johnson.
Thank you so much, Cree. And thank you all for joining us here today. I hope I live up to the hype that Cree just said, but she is a dear friend of mine, so I'm always here to support her. And like she said, we met when I was still in graduate school. That was only a couple of years ago. So I am still early career professional, very new to this, but I'm grateful for all these opportunities, especially to share about environmental and climate change in the Baltimore region. And where do we go from here? Because there's a lot of scary things going on, but there is still even more opportunities and ways to collaborate to keep environmental justice advancing, even if the political environment does not want to. So that is what we are covering today. And I'll actually really be talking about this amazing tool that EDF led development of called the U.S. Climate Vulnerability Index. But before that, I'm going to set the stage and then go into the history of it all. What is the political landscape? And then what can this one tool do despite it all? And then I'm going to work to demo the tool to show you how it all works. And we still want this to be quite an interactive session. So we'll have plenty of time for a Q&A. And then also have breakout groups where you all will be able to look at the tool and figure out ways to make it better or use it in your work. So that is what we plan to do today. And I'm just going to get started. So let's preview what are the most important things we need to know when we're talking about environmental justice. And that is the significance of race. Studies for decades ago have found that race, even more than class, is the #1 indicator for the placement of toxic facilities in the US. In fact, data shows Black Americans are 40% more likely to live in places where extreme temperatures, worsened by climate change will result in higher mortality rates. So this isn't just like civil rights discrimination. This is compounded by climate change, which I will explain during the course of this presentation. But this is very important context to understand where we are and how far we need to go. We know that a destabilized climate is intensifying the severity of extreme weather events, infectious and chronic diseases, and social and economic stresses. Some U.S. communities have, and have always had, access to resources to help them prepare for, endure, and recover from these impacts. But many, however, do not. And they are more vulnerable to climate impacts due to decades of racist housing and infrastructure development, unequal protection of environmental laws, labor market discrimination, and other systemic inequities. Unfortunately, the kinds of persistent environmental injustices and health disparities experienced by communities are not accidental. They're inextricably linked to environmental racism and discriminatory historical practices. Let's take redlining in Baltimore, for example. The Homeowners Loan Corporation was established in the 1930s, right before the surge of suburbanization in the United States. It was supposed to provide mortgage relief to homeowners at risk of losing their homes due to foreclosure. But what loan officers and appraisers eventually did was evaluate mortgage lending risk, which created a property rating system, with A being the best and D being the worst. A ratings went to properties located in homogeneous areas, one that, quote, lack any Black person or people of color in the entire community. Whereas B or C ratings went to properties located in neighborhoods containing Jewish residents or, quote, foreigners, such as Italians or Mexican immigrants. But if a neighborhood contained any Black residents, it was automatically marked as D, regardless of their socioeconomic status or how small a percentage of the population they made up. And this context is very crucial to understand because there were thriving, middle-class, wealthy Black communities before this happened. Take Seneca Village in New York City, Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We were out here. But it's when these systemic policies kept being passed on with an undertone of racism and oppression, that's how people of color, specifically Black communities, got left behind. And did you know Baltimore is considered the birthplace of redlining? This is from Ordinance 610, which is Baltimore's first piece of legislation defining this housing discrimination, and has retroactively been seen as a first example of redlining. And this served as an outline for other states around the country to adopt similar practices throughout the 1930s and on, and it was a purposeful initiative to oppress Black citizens by keeping them isolated in predefined communities, destroying the potential property values of where they live, and in many ways was another way of enforcing segregation throughout cities. Redlining resulted in almost a century of disinvestment and continues to contribute to the conditions perpetuating systemic inequities to this day, including unequal protection of environmental laws and labor market discrimination. The result of low property values in Black and brown redline communities also paved the way for the disproportionate placement of industrial facilities, toxic waste sites, and polluting freeways. In other words, these sources of pollution and the multitude of environmental hazards that come with them were built into low-income communities and communities of color, making it more difficult for them to be resilient in the face of a changing climate. And despite redlining seemingly ending with the passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1986, its repeal did very little to revert the inequalities it created. The U.S. government did nothing to allocate funds or heighten the property values of the previously neglected Black communities, or even help equalize them to their white counterparts. White communities continue to benefit from decades of previous investments, accruing more and more wealth, while Black communities continue to be deprived. And it's those individuals living in historically marginalized areas that are much more likely to be severely impacted by a host of economic disparities, including health hazards, police brutality, access to public and free transit. And even during COVID, Black citizens in Baltimore died at a disproportionately higher rate compared to white residents. And all of this holds true for climate inequities. We are seeing the same picture perpetuated with climate threats, ranging from health issues due to changes in air quality and extreme temperatures due to flooding threats and disruptions to weather-exposed workers. The same conditions at the heart of environmental and health disparities are further exacerbated by climate change in summary. And as you can see in this image, environmental justice neighborhoods in Baltimore on the left, and I'm focusing in on the city center with the butterfly shape. They're the ones that have the highest afternoon temperatures. And on the right, we see the same parts of the city with asthma hotspots. Because what we find is the root endpoint or the endpoint of all of these systems of oppression and historic inequities are health disparities. And, we're already undergoing so much despite all of this historical inequities that perpetuate to today. And now we're under a lot of political attack due to the momentum that we made specifically in the past 5 years. This was pulled a week ago. Harvard has a federal environmental justice tracker that is great to see what is happening. But as we can see here, just 1 month in, Biden made a lot of executive orders that advance EJ, and they've all been rescinded, including Justice 40. We see most environmental justice and equity offices and positions have been removed. And we see key environmental justice screening tools like CJIS and EJ Screen taken down. So I will just say, in reality, this is a very scary time, especially for those that work in the federal government, but those that could be considered DI hires or doing community engagement or even just climate justice work that is also under threat. But that doesn't mean that we should stop, but double down, because the history of this country is built on oppression and silencing of those most marginalized. So this is nothing new. And just like our ancestors kept fighting when the government is against us, so must we. So it truly depends on all of us, and we need especially organized non-governmental resources to support and advocate for environmental and climate justice. Climate justice. And here at EDF, we have a tool that can support those efforts, that can maybe even cut through the noise of politics and keep making strides to advance environmental and climate justice. And that tool is called the U.S. Climate Vulnerability Index. And I don't want to overpromise more than what it actually is, but it is something that can exist and won't be under political attacks that we're seeing from a lot of governmental tools and data. This is in short called the USCBI, and it is an environmental justice screening and mapping tool that uses data to show disparities across America, from access to supermarkets to quality of housing. And what it can do is identify local climate vulnerabilities on a national scale. So what you're seeing here is a national map of overall climate vulnerability data, ranking every census tract in the United States, where the darker the color, the higher the vulnerability. And it's when we can translate lived experience and advocacy into data visualizations that we can help us see which communities face the greatest challenges from the impacts of climate change. And here is a QR code to the tool that you can scan there. So as far as we know of, this is the most thorough, complete compilation of climate impacts out of any screening tool of its kind. It pulls in 184 data sets to rank more than 70,000 US Census tracts. And it does this by combining a broad range of baseline health, social, economic, environmental, infrastructure, and climate data to create a comprehensive vulnerability score for each community. And that means that different communities can be compared to each other and show which interventions need to be prioritized more in one community than the other. It is our hope that policymakers will be able to use this to pinpoint areas where there can be directed investments and targeted climate action that can have the most impact. And we're even looking to expand our audience. We are actually working with a climate impact investing firm so that climate innovations and development can also make sure that they do not perpetuate systemic inequities and legacy pollution and all the burdens that communities have been facing from the start of this country. And this first round of the tool, we really design it so that communities or those with low technical proficiency can still be able to use this tool and data to advocate for policies and investments that build resilience to more, for example, intense wildfires, flooding, and heat waves to come. What makes this tool unique? Well, if we want to create more sustainable, equitable, and resilient and healthier communities, we need data-driven planning and thoughtful policy choices. So when we were creating this tool, we first looked into what was out there in terms of existing screening and mapping tools, and we found a number of them listed here. But as we already know, a lot of them are being taken down and under attack, like CGIS and EJ screen is already down. And who knows how much longer ones of the federal government will be up. It's not looking good. Thankfully, there are still a lot of state mapping tools out there that should be safe, but they still have these certain pros and cons that the CBI try to negotiate. We found that a majority of these other tools had a limited number of indicators, maybe up to 40. They did not reflect cumulative burden. They also lack climate indicators and incorporate little to no input from community members into the tool's development. And of course, there is exceptions, like Calamar Screen had a very extensive community engagement development process. But among our community partners at EDF, we still recognize the need for a better definition of climate vulnerability, as well as robust data-driven screening and mapping tools. And that's why we have this whole host of amazing partners, because from the beginning of this tool development, equity and justice community leaders were involved. And it was feedback from these community partners at every stage that helped ensure the tool include data reflecting their lived experiences and what they felt made their communities vulnerable as well as resilient. For example, from meeting with our community partners in Houston, we found that access to fresh food, like the location in grocery stores, was a very important indicator for them. So we made sure that was included in this tool. And this was done over a period of 2 years where we had these meetings where we went to them or came together virtually to ensure that included indicators were relevant to them and useful for their advocacy. We also engaged an analytics firm called Dark Horse Analytics to design the dashboard for this tool that I'm going to show you and its interactive map of the United States. So it is with these community partners that Environmental Defense Fund and Texas A&M universities embarked on a journey to improve our understanding of the intersection between vulnerability and climate risk. Seeking to adopt a broad definition of vulnerability, we took a systems-based holistic approach that considers the cumulative impacts of both pre-existing vulnerabilities and future risks from climate change. We identified and evaluated both comprehensive and localized data nationwide, and after reviewing more than 200 data sets for inclusion in the US CBI, we prioritized publicly available nationally consistent data for all 50 US states in the District of Columbia. To avoid pandemic-related anomalies, we predominantly obtained annual US Census Tract level data from 2017 and 2019, which we're looking to update shortly. And just for example, each US Census Tract has an average population of about 4,000 people. So we were able to get data down at that granular level to understand hyperlocal differences within urban areas. In the rare instances where a small fraction of census tract data was missing, it was inputted with the median at the next larger geographic scale, either at the county or state level. And to integrate disparate data across multiple data streams, we adapted something called a Toxicological Prioritization Index, or ToxPI, to create a unitless index score that can be used to rank and compare different US communities. And this takes this statistical approach called equal rating to aggregate these data sets at different levels so that we can have an overall score categorized by theme, domain, and subdomain. And it also has the ability to compare data at the county, state, and EPA or public health region levels. Now let's go a little bit into how the data in this tool is organized to produce the visualizations that you'll see next. So overall climate vulnerability scores can be produced at the census tract, county, state, and EPA region scale to better understand how a specific community's vulnerability relates to its neighbors and the rest of the country. Greater vulnerability corresponds to a higher percentile rating. And it's these percentiles and rankings that help show what drives vulnerability and how to prioritize action. For example, of the 1,406 census tracts in Maryland, the Medford Browning Baltimore overall area has an average climate vulnerability score that ranks first in the state due to a variety of long-standing systemic inequities. It is also in the 99th national percentile, meaning that 99% of all other census tracts has less overall climate vulnerability than this one. So this kind of measurement is able to show like not only is this community is burdened, but it's one of the most burdened communities in the entire country, which makes a very compelling case for action to do something about it. But going back to what this tool can show, once we gather all the data for it, these 184 data sets, we group them into two main themes: community baseline vulnerability and climate change impacts. Community baseline data represents the factors and conditions within a community that can limit its resilience to climate challenges, such as household income, access to healthcare, housing conditions, and pollution sources. Under the theme of community baseline, which includes historical data, there are 4 domains, which are social and economic, health, infrastructure, and environment. And it's these domains that these 184 data sets are sorted into. And they're also sorted into climate impacts data, which represents information about past and future impacts of a warming planet, such as temperature-related deaths, extreme heat, sea level rise, and economic and productivity losses. And it's under the theme of climate impacts, which includes a mix of historical data and future projections, that there are 3 domains, which is health, extreme events, and social and economic. As you can see, each of these themes were further divided into categories of domains, and then within each domain, we can group similar indicators together so that we can create more subcategories or more subdomains. And that's when we combine all of these 184 indicators into these different categories that we created the USCVI. And if you can see very small, the number of indicators that went into each domain is shown in parentheses. And just to break down what it looks like, we, for example, have this domain under community baseline called infrastructure. And infrastructure has 6 subdomains, which are food, water, and waste management, transportation, energy, and so on. And then the indicators, or rather the data sets that made up that energy category, are residential energy cost burden, energy from fossil fuels, and EV charging stations. So hopefully that example makes sense about how this tool data is organized, but we'll go into a demo to break down some more to answer any questions about it. So now that we know how this data is organized and what it can show, what does it show for this country? Well, if we go back to the main US map, as you can see, all states across the United States are vulnerable to climate change to some degree. Overall climate vulnerability is highest in the Southeast and further west, in places with statistically significant hotspots like Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California's Central Valley. By contrast, the lowest scores and corresponding cold spots are in the Northeast, Upper Midwest, and Pacific Northwest. When we switch over to the community baseline map, it shows a similar pattern in the South as we solve for vulnerability, but hotspots are more localized. Additionally, community baseline vulnerabilities extend into the Southwest and California's Central Valley. Clearly, this shows that baseline vulnerabilities play a critical role in determining overall climate vulnerability. In communities that have existing environmental justice concerns, like some of the ones outlined in the beginning of this presentation, are typically those with the highest ranking scores. But when we look at our climate impact data, we see that risks extend up into the Mid-Atlantic region and parts of New England. We're also seeing the same pattern in the Southeast and Texas as we see for overall climate vulnerability and community baseline. What is clear from this map is that climate change is going to impact every state across the country. But what does this show specifically for Baltimore communities? Well, as you can see in Baltimore, we see climate vulnerability hotspots all throughout the city. And you see that it forms this butterfly shape around the city center. When we change between overall vulnerability and community baseline, so here's overall community baseline, we see that vulnerability in this community is mainly, or in this area is mainly determined by community baseline vulnerabilities. When we look at the climate impact data, it does vary a bit, but we still see concentrated vulnerability in the city center. So we will have time to look more at this map, but just to give another example, the CVI allows us to drill down into the data further and identify what is driving vulnerability. So what we can do is look at data for the entire city of Baltimore. In Baltimore, what we see most driving vulnerability is pollution sources. So you can see that at the top here. And pollution sources is the number and kinds of polluters in community, which can include metal recyclers, brownfield sites, chemical manufacturers, and risk management plan facilities, which are facilities that pose a serious threat to the public health in the event of a chemical accident and are required to file a risk management plan with EPA. So that shows that these are really hazardous chemical facilities and are so bad that they require enforcement with the EPA. And there's also TSCA facilities that are other hazardous chemical waste manufacturers. From this data, we see that all of these vulnerabilities ranks either the first or second greatest compared to all counties in Maryland. And we also see that vulnerability is driven by criteria air pollutants, so just air pollution in the air, and child and maternal health adverse outcomes. But of course, climate change is driving vulnerability in Baltimore as well, where we see air pollution-related deaths are the 98th national vulnerability percentile and ranks first out of all counties in Maryland. And this is determined from ozone mortality and cardiac arrest related to PM 2.5 mortality, which means increases in heart disease death from fine particulate matter pollution from those that are 65 and older. So I know that was a lot of information. So I want to slow it down so that we can better look through this tool. So there is a QR code here that you can use to access the tool. And if you give me a minute or two, I'm going to also pull up the tool so that we can do a demo together. All right, so I hope you scan that QR code. So now I'm going to go pull up the tool itself. All right. Okay. So This is the US Climate Vulnerability Index. What you can see is this main page has the ability to launch the tool, but there's other important information there. This tab has what the tool is about, the different partners involved, and this next, tutorials and use cases. That's actually what I was involved with. I was the one leading the tutorials for it. So if you want to see my face some more, you can check out the videos there. And there's some other resources out there to use this tool some more. But if you click on this square or over here, then you can launch the tool itself. So here is the intro page for the tool that introduces it, saying it pulls together 184 data sets to rank more than 70,000 US Census tracts. And you can start off by just looking at the map itself, or go ahead and toggle to the two main data categories, which again is community baseline and climate impacts. So you see the map changes underneath doing that. And you can press explore the data just to go around the country. But let's just go ahead and type in Baltimore and see what we have here. All right, so the tool zoomed into Baltimore. And to see the data involved with the neighborhood, you have to click on it. So I gave the example of Medford Browning. You click on it and you see that it has 99th National Vulnerability Percentile at the bottom. So what you can see that the areas that have the highest vulnerabilities are the ones that are darker in color. And you can see patterns of what those vulnerabilities are by looking at this right-hand, we call it indicator tree, that shows all the different categories of data. So as you can see from all these darker colors, there's many things that is driving vulnerability in that community. So if you see health, you see it still lights up very strongly. And if you want to drill down, then under health, you have categories such as physical health, chronic disease, infectious disease. So that's the third layer or fourth layer data. And then when you go beneath those indicators, you see that, for example, the infectious disease category is characterized by COVID-19 deaths, hepatitis B, HIV, chlamydia. So that's just an example of how all these indicators are broken down. But you can view that for climate impacts data and also see how these areas remain vulnerable, which we saw before. The Baltimore region doesn't have as many climate vulnerability or climate change as vulnerability drivers, but we see in the same community, the member still exists. These darker colors on the right, we see that it's extreme events that is driving that vulnerability. And that relates to flooding and storms, which you can keep looking at there. But if we go back to or you can stay on that part, or if you go back to the overall vulnerability, then we can look at a report here on this lower right-hand side. And that takes us to another screen that summarizes the vulnerability for that community. But before we do that, you can see that we can view things here at a census tract level. We can also just look at Baltimore as a city overall. And if you go to the bottom right-hand corner, we can look at EPA regions and the like, so that we can see data at this area, which is something at this level, which is something our community partners advocated for. And lastly, you can filter out vulnerability here, so you can just see what are the most vulnerable communities, which, as you can see in Baltimore, takes that butterfly shape. But going back to this community, let's go ahead and look at the report for it. Right. So on the left-hand side is the similar indicators you saw on the last screen. So you can look at the vulnerability just by how dark the colors are. but you can also see a summary of its ranking in its national vulnerability percentile. So that characterizes the Medford Browning area. And in this next pane, we see what are the top drivers of vulnerability in that community, which is something unique to the CVI. We don't know another tool that's able to aggregate data and calculate this. So we see in this Medford Browning community, we have transportation sources as one of the main drivers of vulnerability. And it's not only third, and well, right now it says EPA Region 3. We can look at Maryland, going back there. It's third in EPA Region 3, but first in Maryland. And not only that, it's in the 99 National Vulnerability Percentile, which means this vulnerability is greater than 99% in the rest of the country. But as far as what these transportation sources are, we can scroll down to see that here. But these are according to the categories. But if we want to see specifically a transportation, then we can click on it. And when we scroll down here, we can see that transportation sources are made up of rail crossings and ports and truck vehicle miles. Like these are the data sets that were used to characterize that vulnerability so that you can have that data in a very visual and detailed format. And all of this is deep linked, which means if you want to show this specific page for a specific community, you can copy and paste the link and it'll go directly there. And if you right click, you can copy all the images or save them. Or if you want them all in one document, then you can print the page here and then see the summary for your community. But just to continue the example, I'm gonna go back to the community. And what we're looking at is the environmental drivers of vulnerability. We also see child and maternal health as a main driver. But if we go into climate impacts, we see that flooding and air pollution related deaths is also driving vulnerability. And once again, we can click on it to see what that more means. But down here is a summary of how all those data sets interact with each other to produce a vulnerability in the rankings. And mainly just show not only like this community is vulnerable, but why and how bad it is compared to the rest of the country. So I hope this tool introduction and demo is very helpful. I really would love to hear from you all before we go into breakout sessions where we test the tool. So I'm going to stop sharing, but I will happy to be able to share some more if you all have questions about it. But I would just really love to hear what you think. Any questions before we spend time to give you all time to look at the tool? All right, Michelle, I see your hand is raised.
Hi, Lauren. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi. I would be curious, two sort of questions. If you could talk a little bit more about how this tool compares to EJ Screen, and also who you think is best suited to use this tool in their work. Like where is your vision for folks using this tool?
Yeah, absolutely. So compared to EJ Screen, believe it has around 20 indicators, no more than 40. So compared to the CVI that has 184 data sets, it's very comprehensive. One thing that I do love about EJ Screen is its community reports. So you can go to a location, click on it, generate a report, and it's really nice. It shows the demographic data. It shows the different pollution sources and their amount. So it really gives that empirical basis, like, oh, this community has average PM 2.5 of 40, I don't know the measurement, micrograms per deciliter, something like that, you know? But this tool is more equity weighted. So you're able to see how communities compare to each other based upon the national percentile and then the ranking in that community. And that leads to applications of showing, okay, we're looking to, let's say, improve air quality by placing air monitor. We can look at this data to see which community has the worst in that area and show that it's not just bad for that area, but for the entire country, which makes a very more compelling case for intervention. But as far as who can be main users of this tool, we try to make it as visual and intuitive as possible so that someone that may not have the best technical proficiency can still use it. But if there's needed for more support, there are tutorials that I led development of that breaks down what the tool is, what each data layer means, and then also has some applications where there's a PowerPoint template where you can go through the tool step by step and then pull data and images from it to create like a presentation slide deck. Researchers can also look at this tool to see just the drivers that can also be a compelling case for research. We've worked a lot with MPOs, municipal planning organizations in Texas, that are looking at the transportation data, and also made custom dashboards pulling that data out so that we can focus in on that indicator. And we actually just submitted a 500,000 grant proposal where we're looking to create more of that user customization feature so that people from different backgrounds and positionalities can use the tools better suited to their needs. And we're looking to branch out into the investor audience because, we have great work with our community partners and government partners, but this kind of work depends on all of us. And to mitigate vulnerabilities in the community, we need capital. So that is why we're also working with investors so that they can use this tool to ensure that climate innovations do not perpetuate ongoing injustices and don't repeat the same mistakes. And that relates to some of the work I do. I actually work with a climate impact investing firm called Azola Ventures. And I also work on a committee that reviews investments, and I'm specifically looking at justice and equity. So this tool is for everyone, as far as I know.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think I saw another hand raised. Okay, Darnell?
Hey, Lauren, thanks for the presentation. And that was a good first question because I was recently looking to use the Maryland EJ screening tool to find it was unavailable. So this is great timing. My question is, Maryland has a definition of underserved communities, and included in that definition is data on income, ethnicity, and language proficiency. I'm wondering if this tool also has those layers of data.
I will show you that now. Great question. Right, so on this left-hand side, this is a demographic profile. So you see how the community is broken down by race. But as far as, I know you mentioned like language, you can actually search for the data in this search box, and it's also on the right-hand side of the screen when you look at the main page. So when you click on that, you see that we have data sets for redlining, whether a community speaks English less than well, prison population, considered minority, homeless. It does have that data. I can't remember all the other data sets you asked for. What's another one you're looking to see?
The other would be income.
Right. So we can type in income here. You see that low income pops up. And at the top, it says that this data set is ranking by percentage of the population's income per person. So there may be other tools, of course, that's able to break this down at a layer of nuance that's more usable, but the same ideas are integrated in this tool and can be useful where government tools that did exist weren't able to show that racial data in its calculations, even if it's able to show its demographic profile.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Right, so looking at the chat. Yes, we can share the slides for this, no problem. This data can provide a baseline for air sampling within the hotspots. Absolutely. Like we can look at just how far or how granular the air pollution data is. So how about I'll go to the main map just to show this. And let me just look at Baltimore as a county, just to make it a little bit easier. So, like I said, there's a search box on this right-hand side. And we include a lot of data sets for pollution. So we have it under climate impacts, air pollution related deaths, illnesses, and we can see, unfortunately, that really lights up in this region to show it's not just very bad in the state, but in the entire country. And then there's also similar indicator, air pollution related illnesses, and then also air pollutants. So here we have a lot of toxic ones, such as ones that are bad for your kidneys. Once again, unfortunately, that is also an issue in Baltimore. So there is a lot of granularity with that air pollution as a particular data set. All right, so someone is asking about cancer data. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull that up. No, that's the wrong side. That's the location. Here's the indicator. So we want to see how cancer is looking like for Baltimore. And yeah, it's just showing it is very low for Baltimore. Which is interesting. I almost wonder if, let's see, that's for the county. Okay. So I was almost like, does the data exist? It looks like it does, but you're totally right. It seems very low, especially in this butterfly shape. And we can, I mean, there's one area here that lights up a bit more, but oh, interesting. So at least with this cancer data I'm looking at, it's only for, well, non-skin cancer. I thought I just said skin cancer. So that includes a lot of diseases there. But you're right, it is interesting that it's not as high. I'm not sure if I can properly explain why that is, because we see that there is a lot of other chronic disease that lights up in this area. So not only cancer, but diabetes seems very strong. Stroke, adult asthma, COPD, CHD. But interestingly, cancer seems lower, but that doesn't mean that there is not health challenges in this community. There clearly are. Great, I'm still. Okay, Dr. Holman Hill had a great question. Has EDF ever thought about ground truthing with the data sets with their own environmental monitoring? So that is what we hope to do next with this tool to update it, where we like to have a comprehensive user testing phase, where we will do a variety of surveys and focus groups from people with different professional backgrounds, but also community members from around the country, those that with technical proficiency, those without, so that we can truly see how does this data compare to lived experience. As far as we could, we included empirical data sets that were mostly collected by governmental sources. Unfortunately, those may be in jeopardy. But other than that, the only data sets that are more from modeling were the climate impacts one. The other ones were more historical data, but of course, everything still needs to be validated, and that is a very high hope once we can continue more funding and momentum to go in that direction. See a question? Yes, we will share the recording. Okay, I think I addressed all the questions in the chat. Really appreciate your great feedback. Is there any other questions I'd like to add? Oh, okay. Someone just said they would love to add air quality data to this. So another feature that I did not show is if there is data that is missing, but you have, let's say, a CSV file of point data. So this area with this longitude and latitude has this number, then you can actually go down here. It says overlay data and add it to the tool, and it'll come up as points. We are looking to have the ability to put in shape files, so you can have those like raster data layers added to the tool to add to what is missing, but that doesn't exist yet. But like I said, there is a lot of air pollution related data sets here, so I highly encourage you all to check it out. And we're about to have breakout rooms to give you all time to do just that, and I'm happy to answer any more questions around that. So, Cree, are we good to go with breakout rooms?
Yep, all set.
Great. And what we like to encourage you all is in these rooms, think about go ahead and play with the tool. Think about ways that can be useful to your work, ways that can be improved. And I'm gonna hop around to different groups, answer any questions, and dig into the tool together. Okay, so I think we're good to go for breakout groups, right? All right. I'll see you all there. In Cree, I don't know if I have like a host feature so that I can hop around. Right now I just say I'm joining a room.
Yeah, I'll try to set that up.
All right.
All right. So yeah, if you just go to the room, I will.
Yeah, I see. Let me go ahead and go to that room.
Yeah, and then in like 5 minutes, I'll just move you to another room.
Okay. And how many rooms are there?
2.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yep. All righty.
All right.
back in the main session. Letting everybody come in from their breakout sessions. Welcome back. How were the breakout sessions? Does anybody want to come off mute or put a question or give their takeaways in the chat and share with the broader group? Don't be shy.
I am a teacher, so I would call on someone if I need to.
I will just share that I really am so grateful that I had the opportunity to come to the Greater Baltimore Climate Summit and see those presentations and meet so many people, from formal meeting people to just randomly bumping into people, and that that you're continuing that experience where we get to meet new people and we get to continue to discuss these topics is really appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you.
That's just the brilliance of Cree Harris. So huge shout out. She's amazing.
Yeah, good afternoon, Lauren. Just what came up in our breakout was, I'm assuming that this tool operates on the ArcGIS Online platform.
Mapbox.
Oh, it's Mapbox. Oh, okay. Yeah, because okay. Yeah, because I was just, well, that just answers my own question as to whether we could layer in data from the ArcGIS Online what is it called? Atlas, some map atlas, but I guess that's, yeah. So, but I mean, but once we get the shapefile capability, then that can happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank
you. Dr. Padgett is a dear mentor of mine, so shout out to him as well.
One of the other things that we were talking about in our group, we were curious if there were plans to build community or connections with funders, because often the federal tools have been used to qualify for funding, and rallying investors, whether that's at the state level or whether that's private funders, to support the use of the CVI tool could be impactful.
Yep. It's a work in progress. Fortunately, I'm from EDF, and then that's how we operate with a lot of funding. Well, we're a nonprofit, so we have to have funding. And we have good relationships with some like Welcome Trust, Nathan Cummings Foundation, that funds like climate and health or social justice focused work. But it's been difficult. Like, it was very easy to get the tool funded and started, but to maintain it has been harder. That's less glossy. But we're trying to reframe it from an impact angle. Like, okay, we want to user test this or pilot it with investors. That's the impact. But to do that, we need to update it. So we have some proposals submitted or working on
cool
for that. Yeah.
So you can add, as as a funder, collaborates and uses the tool, you can add modules to it and
right. We're actually trying to create a custom dashboard feature where you can pull out specific indicators and then have like a tailored tool that's more usable. We just submitted a proposal for that, so fingers crossed.
Very good.
So I've got two questions. One is, if I'm putting up low cost monitor data, is that weighted differently than something from like a government, high quality monitor? And how is there going to be some sort of formula on how to look at one piece of data versus another?
Right. So I wasn't involved with the calculations, but we did aim to use all those high quality data sets. Like we didn't put in low cost sensors. We would use satellite data at the very least. I mean, there is that feature, put in your own point data. So then that's up to your interpretation. But as far as the statistics around it, I'm not as familiar, but there was some sort of equity weighting happening. And that was especially involved because you don't just have overall data and then the indicators. You have, oh, this is characterized in community baseline, it's characterized in the health, chronic disease, like all those different layers were weighted in certain ways. But I'm not an epidemiologist or statistician, so I can't really explain that super well.
Okay. And then my other question, since we're inside almost all the time, is there any indoor air quality that goes into these?
And that's the hardest one, right? Like we have private property where you can't
Yeah.
just go in and measure it. So yeah, that's a big limitation. There isn't any national data sets on that as far as I know of.
Okay. Huh.
But hopefully we can say, oh, this area is a hotspot for nitrous oxide. You're exposed to that. And then have a cleaner cook stove. I don't know.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I was very happy to hear that community science data can be added to the tool. So that's especially with low cost air sensors, because we've worked with both Korea and Lauren have worked on the ground with me with community based organizations, and specifically in Houston, Texas, we work with an organization that started off with a low cost air sensor project that I believe was sponsored by the PDF. I'm sure it was. With Clarity sensors. And they were able to show enough evidence in their community using EJ screen in combination with their low cost sensors that now they're going to have a regulatory sensor placed in their community. So that's how powerful this kind of work can be when you take community science observations and add them to a data visualization tool like this. So that's big. That's huge.
Great example, right? And just to have the data accessible and visual to a layperson, it's a challenge, but that was really top of mind for us.
Well, I definitely want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you for contributing to the conversation and being willing to have the dialogue across the various sectors that you all work in, especially right now when we're not supposed to be having these kinds of conversations, supposedly. I wish you all an amazing day, and we'll see you guys at the next one.
My email's in the
Thank
chat
you.
if you want to further connect, but just thank you all for your time and excitement for all this. It's very energizing.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.